This is South America, and this is a country called Peru. It draws tourists with its coastal views, the ruins of ancient cities, and also because it's where China does business. The PRC showed up in Peru not just as a tourist, but in its usual style, with a megaproject worth over $3 billion. Ships swarmed the quiet coast not far from the capital, Lima, and started scooping up tons of sand from the seabed. Of course, the Chinese builders didn't skip out on making a tunnel. Have you ever seen a major Chinese project that didn't involve some kind of high-tech passageway through solid rock? If we put it simply, all this is about radically changing trade between China and South America. But if you want the details, let's get into it. Hold on a sec. Just imagine how the U.S. would react if China suddenly kicked off some massive project right next door. Well, we'll talk about that too. Let's start it for real. The year was 2000. Trade between South American countries and China wasn't exactly impressive. $8.5 billion worth of goods flowed from China to Brazil, Chile, Peru, Argentina, and a bunch of neighboring countries. And going the other way to China was only about $3.9 billion. At the start of the new century, less than 2% of Latin America's exports were headed to China. So yeah, you get the idea, not much. If only these South American countries and China had known back then what this would turn into. According to the Chinese government, over the next 8 years, trade between Latin America and China grew by an average of 31% a year. And in 2021, the Chinese government came out with the following data. By 2021, trade between South America and China had hit a record-breaking $450 billion. Already by 2022, the numbers went beyond that mark. South American countries were getting goods worth over $303 billion from China, and in return, they were shipping out almost $200 billion worth. So trade's booming, and more soybeans, different kinds of vegetables, and animal products are making their way to China. According to the Economic Commission for Latin America, from 2010 to 2022, this part of the world accounted for nearly a third of China's food imports. On top of that, South American countries have been actively shipping copper, oil, cooking oil, and other raw materials needed to keep China's ever-growing industry running. Lithium stands out in particular. It's actively mined in the South American Andes and is in high demand in China, the world's leader in electric vehicle production. They need it for batteries. In return, the Asian country sends over higher-value industrial goods. Nearly 50% of Latin America's imports from China are computers, telecom gear, and industrial equipment. 52% of the imports are construction, manufacturing, and energy equipment. Around 27% of the goods coming in from China are home appliances, electronics, toys, and household items. Clothing, fabrics, and shoes make up 7.5% of the imports, and another 7.3% is made up of industrial chemicals, fertilizers, and plastic products. Basically, food and raw materials head to China from South America, and what comes back are the finished products made from them. Latin America is the source of resources, and China is the place where stuff gets made. Trade volumes are growing, everyone's happy, but there's still a problem: getting all these goods transported. The thing is, the fastest way to ship goods would be straight from the west coast of South America to China and back, exactly along the same line we just showed. Unfortunately, that wasn't an option. The goods were assembled somewhere in China, then shipped, say, to the port of Hong Kong, and from there traveled across the Pacific to the port of Manzanillo in Mexico or Long Beach in the U.S. And only after that were the goods sent on to the target country in South America. If the goods needed to go to countries located in the central or even eastern parts of the South American continent, the container ships had to pass through the Panama Canal, since it's the only working and fastest route from the Pacific Ocean to the Atlantic, and actually that was a problem too. Despite its huge importance for global trade, the 50-mile narrow passage between the two oceans isn't all that convenient for transporting goods. Its normal maximum capacity is 36 to 38 ships a day. This already sets a certain limit, which reduces trade opportunities between China and South America. And let's not forget that the Panama Canal is pretty narrow, and any problem can significantly cut down its traffic. For example, in 2023, the average temperature in the area went up, while at the same time the amount of rainfall dropped by 35% due to a natural phenomenon called El Niño. As a result, the water level in Gatun Lake seriously dropped from the operational norm of 88 feet to a worrying 78 feet. And this lake is the main reservoir feeding the locks of the Panama Canal. The result? Well, here it is on the screen: traffic jams in which at one point there were about 200 ships. In a slightly better situation, the jam had around 150 vessels, and by September of the same year, 89 container ships were waiting to pass. This was caused by the fact that the average waiting time to pass through the canal increased quite a bit. The figure in August 2023 was almost 4 times higher than in June. Also, the jams were caused by a reduction in the canal's maximum daily capacity. Normally, the number of ships that can pass from the Pacific to the Atlantic Ocean reached 36, but in the problematic period, at its worst, this figure was reduced to as low as 22. Last year, the Panama Canal Authority started reducing the maximum allowed draft, which is the distance between the waterline and the bottom of the hull. So the usual limit was 49 feet for the largest class of ships. As a result of the decrease, the draft was reduced to 43 feet, which required some container ships to lighten their load. There was probably no other way around it. However, just imagine what container ships had to do to reduce their draft. They had to spend extra money and time, and every minute, especially in global trade, is incredibly valuable. The Panama Canal had never faced problems of this magnitude before, but smaller issues are still fairly common. However, even without incidents, the shipping time for goods from China to the eastern part of South America was still very long. Plus, going through the canal always meant extra costs, even without droughts or excessive waiting. Insurance fees ranged from $60,000 to $200,000, which significantly raised export expenses. In short, the Panama Canal, though a lifesaver, wasn't exactly all that profitable. And now there's the Chinese port in Peru, meant to save trading countries from extra costs and speed up the movement of goods. It's not that the idea of building this port in Peru came about just when trade between China and South America became huge. As far back as 2007, a former admiral of the Peruvian Navy had the idea of building a port south of the historic Chancay Pier. In 2016, they even began initial work on the project, although much smaller in scale. After that, in 2019, the Peruvian company Vulcan and the Chinese Costco Shipping decided to revisit an old idea. They assigned tasks, did the design work, engineering developments, and much more, and also announced the total cost of building the port will reach or might even exceed $3 billion. In general, China brought its usual approach to megaprojects and their price to Peru. However, unlike in 2007, they actually started working on it. The first phase of the Chancay Port project kicked off in 2021 and included the construction of 4 berths, 1,300 feet long, 2 for containers, and 2 multi-purpose ones. There's nothing particularly surprising about that, but still, one specific, more important detail stood out. Dozens of ships arrived at the construction site and then started hauling up millions of tons of sand, silt, and whatever else was down there. Why? The project required dredging. Look, there are standard container ship sizes that show whether they can make it through the Panama Canal. The first one is Panamax. This standard is defined by the size of the original lock chambers of the canal, each of which is 110 feet wide, 1,050 feet long, and has a draft of 41 feet. Based on that, a container ship that earns this title has the right dimensions to pass through the oldest locks. Then there's Neo-Panamax. It came about when a set of larger gates was built with increased length and width and depth that allows ships with a 50-foot draft to pass through. This means the Panama Canal can now handle container ships carrying up to 14,000 20-foot containers, and that's the maximum the canal can take. But there are container ships in the world that can carry more cargo and meet the post-Panamax standard. If we don't get into the details, they're just bigger than the max size allowed for the Panama Canal, so they can't go through it. That's a big issue because post-Panamax ships could make trade way more efficient. So basically, the dredging brought out Chancay's main feature, its maximum depth, which reached 58 feet, turning the port into the first spot on the west coast of South America that can handle mega container vessels holding up to 18,000 20-foot containers. That is, all the ships that can't make it through the Panama Canal. As we mentioned right from the start, it's rare to see Chinese projects without a tunnel, so Peru's getting one as well. In the port of Chancay, they were drilling to create a tunnel linked to port operations. It has 3 traffic lanes for vehicles that either come to pick up arriving cargo or drop off goods headed to China. The connection runs through a special access complex cut through the mountain rock. Everything's done in Chinese style. If you've seen our videos, you know what we're talking about. The speed limit's capped at 37 miles per hour, which is enough for goods to pass through the 1.1-mile tunnel fairly quickly and safely. On top of that, there are 2 conveyor belts for solid bulk materials and pipelines for liquid cargo. And most importantly, all of this is connected to the Pan American Highway. That means the goods coming in from China can be easily moved to pretty much any country in Western South America, and vice versa. Each of these countries gets an easy way to send their goods to China. To handle different types of cargo in Chancay, they built 2 yards for bulk and general cargo, plus 2 more for containers. Basically the usual must-haves for any modern port. And did you know that seaports are affected by waves? This is dangerous not because some container ship might suddenly flip over, but because of the slow destruction of port infrastructure and shoreline erosion. And that's not all the ocean or sea can do to a port. Currents can carry, say, silt into the port area, and over time, that silt can turn Chancay from a post-Panamax port into a Panamax one. In other words, its depth will decrease. To protect against all of this, the Chinese, together with the Peruvians, built a breakwater. Here it is on your screens. Its length is 1.6 miles, which of course doesn't make it a record holder. However, that's not necessary here. These dimensions are enough for protection. The breakwater contains thousands of tons of gravel as well as 25,700 units of special aquapode blocks, which required 4 million cubic feet of concrete to make. In general, the port is protected from destruction for many years to come. It might sound strange, but the opening of a new route between South America and China was marked by fruit. After the first phase of construction was completed, Chancay sent off the Chinese vessel Shanghai to Shanghai, loaded with 20,000 tons of fruit like blueberries, avocados, grapes, and mangoes. And here's the main point. The ship made it from Peru to China in just 23 days, meaning the port really is speeding up trade between Latin American countries and China just as planned. The test went well. So does that mean it's time to keep building? Nope. A month later, the first batch of electric cars from China arrived in Peru for fruit. It came on a big container ship that arrived pretty fast, just as planned. No one's waiting for the project to finish. Chancay's so important for trade between China and South America that the connection is already up and running. That said, construction will keep moving forward at the same time. In the second phase of the project, the operational zone will be finished by adding 11 more docks, bringing the total up to 15. And the price tag will jump from $1.3 billion to about $3 to $3.6 billion. Now it's time to figure out who's getting what after Chancay is fully done. First of all, this will benefit Peru, South America as a whole, and China. According to the plans, Chancay's capacity will be 1 million TEUs, or 1 million 20-foot containers a year, and that's just in the short term. Down the line, the port's expected to handle up to 1.5 million 20-foot containers each year. There's also another pretty striking figure. The port will be able to take in over 40,000 tons of goods every single day. That said, judging by the first container ships that passed through the port, the Panama Canal and other routes are left out of the game because travel time will be cut from around 35 to 23 days. Also, let's repeat that the port can handle post-Panamax container ships, which the Panama Canal still can't. All this will save money, which is usually what countries aim for when they trade. So the port's incredibly useful for China and South America. And let's not forget about other Asian countries that now have a much easier and more profitable way to trade with South American nations. Now let's look at the benefits for Peru. According to different sources, this specific country could earn as much as $4.5 billion from the port, but that's not all. Any kind of construction means jobs. Even though a large number of Chinese workers are currently operating in the Chancay area, Peruvians are also taking part. Plus, as it's claimed, once the construction is finished, the guests from Asia will leave, and the port will offer 8,000 jobs to the South American country. There are also problems. For example, local communities have voiced concerns about the social and economic fallout of the project. Reportedly, the construction has led to heavier road traffic, which affected air quality and noise levels in nearby towns. Fishermen who rely on the area around the new port for their income say the construction works have disrupted their activities and fear their livelihoods might dry up completely. Why? Building something like this just can't happen without some kind of negative impact on the local wildlife, especially those in the water. Construction work, waste, and all that, that's exactly why some fish species might swim away or disappear completely, and those fish bring money to the fishermen, so the concern is totally valid. Well, there's one more issue, and it's way bigger than all the previous ones. The Chancay port is a massive headache for the U.S., who's been trying to cement their influence in South America for decades. Recently, these countries have been actively competing on the world stage, and now there's even a new port right next to the U.S. there's this big Chinese initiative called Belt and Road, or BRI. The U.S. doesn't really like it because it's increasing China's influence all over the world. Recently, Panama was part of the BRI. Yes, the one with the Panama Canal, which we already talked about today. Not long ago, the U.S. put pressure on Panama, which is why they pulled out of the initiative. The backyard of the states needs security, as Trump says. Despite this, South America is slowly shifting towards trade relations with China, and Peru even let China build a port, which will become the main trade hub between South America and Asia. Because of this, many are expecting some action from the U.S. led by Trump. Plus, after the launch of Chancay, Chinese container ships are unlikely to come anywhere near the Panama Canal, which is controlled by the U.S. In 2023, when Chancay was in the middle of active construction, the American think tank CSIS suddenly started raising concerns about the new port, saying that the U.S. government was very worried about Peru's national security. According to one report, the new port's characteristics make it the perfect place for Chinese military ships to dock. This leads to the possibility that Peru could potentially serve as a foothold for the Chinese fleet in South America. But these are only speculations. At the moment, what's clear is that the new port has already brought benefits to both Asia and South America and will continue providing them in the future.